Hello and welcome to another motion edition of Apple a Day. In today's episode, we're going to recreate the title sequence from 1990's Baywatch. We're just going to recreate that last 8 seconds where the word Baywatch slides across the screen with a sunset in the background, and there's going to be some masking happening, and I'm going to show you how all that is accomplished in Apple Motion. But before we begin, you're going to need to download the assets that we're using. There's a DropBox link in the description, so go ahead and click on that to download the assets. Once you get that downloaded and unzipped, you should see 4 videos and 1 PNG file. I already have those opened and ready to go in a Finder window on my desktop. And once you get that downloaded, you're going to make a new project in Motion, and this is just going to be a standard HD project, but you only need a duration of 8 seconds. So once you get that set up and created, we can get started. So the assets that I've provided, we've got some clips that will play in the sequence. And we've got the logo itself. Now the whole purpose of this tutorial is really to show you how to do some masking. So you can use just text if you like. I actually was going to have you create the text yourself, but it seems simpler just to supply a PNG file for the logo. We have the sun background and a sunset, which will be masked into the logo at the very end, and water, which is also masked into the logo. Before we do anything, here's our source video that we used as a guideline to create this. This is the actual opening sequence from the show from the 90s. Obviously, what we've done is a little bit different, simply because it's widescreen and it's higher quality, so it's a little crisper. And obviously, I'm not using the same source video for our composition, simply because I don't have them. And even if I did, they would be low resolution and not widescreen. All right, so let's get started by dragging the sun video onto the layers panel. And let's rename that group to sun. And if I play this, you'll see the video already has the sun moving across it. I already created that, so we don't have to animate that. However, we do need to mask that sun because we need to play video within the confines of that sun. Now, had I had a movie file with just the sun independent of the sky, then that would have solved the problem, but I didn't have that. So we're going to actually have to manually mask out that moving sun. And it's not that hard, but it will take a few minutes. So I'm just going to move the playhead back so the sun is centered on the screen. So we're going to create this mask now, even though we don't need it until a little bit later. And to create the mask, we're just going to use the circle tool. And we're going to create this so that it matches the shape of the sun as close as possible. This does not have to be perfect. Well, that looks pretty good right there. Now we're going to rename this circle to Sun Mask. So in your timeline now, make sure that the sun mask starts at the very beginning. I forgot to move my playhead to the beginning before I created that circle. So we're just going to drag that over and extend it to the end. Now we have to have that mask track the actual movement of the sun across the screen. We could try using some of the built-in motion tracking, but let's actually do this old school using keyframes, and it really won't take that long. So move the playhead to the beginning until the sun is just off the screen. Right about there is good. And then go to the inspector under properties, and let's change the position of our circle just by clicking and dragging until it also is just off screen. And let's actually make everything a little bit easier to see by changing the opacity of the circle to 30% so we can see through it. So what I want to do is add a keyframe to the position property of the sun mask right where it's off screen, and that's going to be our starting point. And then I'm going to press the right arrow key to move out, and I don't have to keep clicking this button to add a keyframe. As soon as I change a value, it will add a keyframe for me. So I'm just going to click and drag, and it looks like this needs to be up higher a little bit. So there we go. So there, I've just made an adjustment. I just made a keyframe, and you can see that it is following. And then of course it stops there, and I'm going to move out a little bit more and then drag up a little bit and over There. So I've now made another keyframe. And then go out a little bit more. Yeah, so basically just do this until you go all the way across the screen. You can always go back and double check to make sure that it's following the sun. Right here I'm off a little bit, so I'll just, if I move it, it'll make another keyframe right there. I find that every 3 frames seems to work best. All right, that's done. Now, that's probably the hardest thing we have to do on here. Perhaps using the built-in motion tracking feature in Motion, that might have saved us time. But it's always a good exercise to know how to do this the manual way. Okay, so let's play this back. And you can see our circle mask follows the sun video perfectly. I'm just going to reset that opacity to 100. By the way, I forgot to save my project, so I'm going to do that right now. And you should do the same. Command S, and I'm just going to call this Baywatch Titles. And I'm going to save it into that Apple a Day Baywatch folder that's already on my desktop. Okay, so now let's bring in the Baywatch text. Now, make sure you move your playhead to the very beginning so that when I drag it in, the text starts there. So you're going to take the Apple a Day Baywatch logo.png file and drag that onto the project inside the Layers panel. And switch over to Properties, and the first thing we want to do is set the scale to 100%, because what happens is Apple Motion will always automatically scale whatever you drag in. It'll scale it to fit the window. So we're going to put that to 100. So that's the actual size that we needed. Of course, another way I could have fixed that was to just click on this drop-down menu and choose Reset Parameter. It would have put that to 100 as well. So with the playhead at the beginning, I am going to move this logo off screen to the right because it's going to come in from the right. So right about there is good. That's where it's going to start. Once that's moved off screen to the right, we are going to add a keyframe. And then we know that we want this logo to take roughly 6.5 seconds because that's based on the original title sequence. At 6.5 seconds, we're going to move this off screen to the left. I'm just clicking and dragging in the X position. So right there is the other keyframe. Now, we don't want this, if you look at the animation here, notice that this animation, you can see it's easing in and easing out. We want this to move consistently. We don't want it to accelerate and decelerate. So with both keyframes selected, I'm going to right click on the mouse and go to Interpolation and select Linear, and that'll just move it in a straight line. So if we play this back, you'll see Baywatch goes off to the left as the sun goes off to the right. So before we move on, I'm going to rename this group to Baywatch Text. So the next thing we need to do is add the water to fill the Baywatch logo. But actually it's the reverse. Actually it's the Baywatch logo that will mask out the water in the water video. So let's go back to our desktop. I'm going to select the Apple a Day Baywatch water video and I'm going to drag that into the Baywatch text group. And right away I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to go to Add Image Mask. And then I'm going to select the Apple a Day Baywatch text and drag that into the mask source. And then if I play this back, you should see the Baywatch logo full of water. All right, we're getting someplace. Now, if you watch the original title sequence, you'll see that the sun, as it moves across the screen, has video playing in it, various clips. So that means that the video clips that are playing are masked by the sun, which is that circle that we already created, the sun mask, and had it move across the screen, tracking the sun. But those video clips are also playing only within the letters of the Baywatch logo. So it's masked against that as well. So it's like a double mask. So that gets a little tricky, but we're going to work on that next. Let's start by masking the sun with the video clips. So we're going to make a new group by right-clicking and selecting New Group. I'm going to call this Baywatch Sun. Make sure your playhead's at the beginning. Go back to the Finder, to the desktop, and I'm going to drag on the Clips video. So the sun mask that we created, I'm going to select that and I'm going to drag that into the group. And then I'm going to right click on the Apple a Day Baywatch clips, select Add Image Mask, and then take that sun mask and drag it into the mask source for that video. Then you want to select that group and right click on it. I'm going to add yet another mask to it. And then I'm going to grab the Baywatch logo, the one that's inside the Baywatch text, because this is the one that has the keyframe on it that's moving across the screen. So I'm going to grab that and drag that in as the mask source for the Baywatch sun group. So the video has a sun mask on it, but then this entire group, these two items, also is now masked to the Baywatch logo. So watch what happens when I play this back. So let me back up and I'll just show you. Okay, so I undid a bunch of things. I'm going to show you this again. So you can see that the video is masked to that sun, to that circle that we created, right? But then we needed to mask the whole thing to the Baywatch text so that the video only plays within the letters of the Baywatch logo. So that's why when we went to the Baywatch sun and to the image mask, which I had already created, but now it's empty. You can see it's empty there. I'm going to take the Apple a Day Baywatch text and drag that back into the mask source. And that masks that video within the sun and also within the Baywatch text. Double mask. It's very cool. And it's the exact same effect that they use in the show. The one thing I want to do is to soften the look of this a little bit. So I'm going to make a new group at the very top. Right click, new group. And I'm going to call it Sun Top. I'm going to duplicate the sun video. And I'm going to move this up to the top. So once that is moved into the sun top group, I'm going to right click on it, add an image mask, and drag in the sun mask circle. If I play that, you'll see now that the sun by itself is on top of the Baywatch logo. Now, that's what we want, but we want to be able to see through it. So the whole point of this was to soften it to not make the video playing within the Baywatch logo so bright. So I'm going to change the opacity of the sun top group to 20%. And that makes the video somewhat muted and yellowed by the power of that sun. So if I play this back, I think it looks a little bit better. Feels a little more natural. The contrast isn't so harsh. So the next part is to have a copy of the Baywatch logo move backwards roughly halfway through. Right about here, right about at the center point where Baywatch is more or less centered on the screen, that's when another copy of the logo appears, and as you move across, it starts to shrink into the background. And then right about here, the logo changes from being filled with water to being filled with a sunset. So let's get started on making that happen. I'm going to move my playhead back to the beginning. I'm going to go back to my layers and add a new group. And I'm going to call this group Baywatch Back. Now this has to move underneath the other Baywatch logo. There we go. Okay, so then I'm going to go back to the Finder and select the Baywatch logo as well as the water video again. Actually, while I'm here, we also need the sunset video. So we might as well drag all three on. Grab those, drag them into the Baywatch Back. And the reason we drag that sunset video is because we'll be adding a transition of the masks. So this version of the Baywatch logo is going to start out with the water, but then it's going to fade to the sunset. But we'll just turn the sunset off right now. If we go back to the Baywatch logo itself, we need to scale that back to 100% and click on the drop-down arrow and choose Reset Parameter. That'll make it 100%. So if we turn the water off, it's actually on top of it. You can see it's the same size as the other one. So what has to happen is we want this logo now, this new Baywatch logo that we added, we want it to appear exactly underneath the current logo as it's moving across. So if you take your playhead, what you want to do is drag this out until it kind of matches. So right about there, that looks pretty good. So in my video, it's at 3 seconds and 7 frames. And what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to move it slightly to the right. I have it selected. So I'm going to move that logo slightly to the right just so that I don't have that white edge. I'm going to make sure it's exactly underneath. Okay, so this is where that logo is going to appear. So if I select the Baywatch back group, what I want to do is I don't want this video, I don't want any of this stuff like the water or the sunset or the Baywatch text to appear prior to where this playhead is at. So if I press the letter I for in point, it should make the Baywatch back and its enclosed layers start at that point in the timeline where my playhead is at. And as you can see, they disappeared from here. It changed the in point to be right there. So if I go back, the text is not there. It's not on screen. It only starts right here, which is exactly what we want. So now we want to mask the water with the Baywatch text. So let's select the water. I'm going to turn that back on. Select it and right click and select Add Image Mask. And now drag in this Apple a Day Baywatch PNG onto the mask source. The reason we added this Baywatch logo a second time is because the first one that we added actually has keyframes on it where it's moving across the screen. So we needed a new version of it that was static and not moving. So if I move my playhead over, you'll see that there's the logo right there. Of course, it's too big. We need to shrink it down. So we're going to do that right now. So I'm going to select the Baywatch back group. I'm going to go over to Properties and Scale. I'm going to set a keyframe right here because we want it to start scaling right when it appears. And I'm going to drag the playhead right to the very end. I'm going to add another keyframe and we are going to scale this down to 40%. Now, obviously we have an issue right off the bat, and that the logo is cropped. And that's because when the group is scaled, it scales what was in the group originally. And originally, it was exactly what you see on screen. And that's because the Baywatch text filled up the screen and it went off to the left and the right. You couldn't see it, it was cropped. And that was the mask on the water. So to solve this problem, what we need to do is make the water bigger. So you just select the Apple a Day water video. And if we change the scale of this to 180%, that will work. Now the water is larger, so it is able to utilize the entire Baywatch logo, and that solves the problem. And while we're at it, even though we're not using it yet, we're going to change the scale of this other Baywatch sunset to 180% as well. When we actually implement this sunset fade, we will need that. So now that's already taken care of and it won't be a problem. So if I were to play this back right about here, that's pretty much exactly what we want. It needs a little finesse and we're going to work on that right now. So I'm going to go back to that first frame. Yeah, we actually want to fade in this logo. So I'm going to select the Baywatch back group. I'm going to go to the opacity parameter. And you want to make sure your playhead is at the very beginning of that Baywatch back group. And under opacity, I'm going to add a keyframe and I'm going to set it to 0 because we want it to fade in. And we want it to fade in where it's completely opaque at 5 seconds and 10 frames, which is roughly timing that matches the original video. So at that point, at that 5 second and 10 frame mark, I'm going to add another keyframe and drag that opacity out to 100%. So if I play that back, we'll see that logo fade in. I'm moving very slowly here so you can tell. By having it fade in, you can see there's some separation between the foreground logo and the background logo. It just works a little bit better. So the next thing we want to do is fade the background to black. In the original video, the sun background does fade. So I'm going to select that sun group. I'm going to go to the 5 second mark. It starts to fade right about here. I'm going to add a keyframe. I'm going to go to the 6 second and 15 frame mark. So about 1.5 seconds for it to fade to black. Add another keyframe and change the opacity of that sun group to 0. And I just realized my background in the project is set to transparent. So if you go to Command J, Project Settings, Apple J, and you'll see in the very bottom, so I've got a background color of black, but my background is set to transparent. I actually want it to be solid. There we go. If I hit play, oh, that's perfect. That is exactly the transition we want. So the logo comes out, it fades to the background fades to black. Looks great. So now we need to fade that water mask into the sunset mask. So the best way to do that is first we have to apply the mask also to the sunset. So I'm going to turn the sunset on, right click on it, the Apple a Day Baywatch sunset, add an image mask, drag the text, the Baywatch text, into the mask source. So with the water version, this one here, I'm going to go to 5 seconds. I'm going to go to Properties and Opacity. And here's what we're going to do. We're going to fade out the first one. It'll basically fade into the sunset. And we're going to make this 1 second long. So we're going to move to 6 seconds. Add another keyframe. And if I change that opacity to 0, you'll see the sunset inside Baywatch. So I'll play that back. Turns into the sunset. Perfect. So the last thing we want to do to this is make that video a little more sepia looking, which is how it looked in the original sequence. So this is actually pretty easy. I'm just going to select the video for the sunset. I'm going to go up to Filters, down to Color, and just choose sepia. And out of the box, that's exactly what we want. I don't have to change a thing. It's perfect. That was easy. So now the last thing we want to do is just fade out the logo. So at 7 seconds, I'm going to select the Baywatch back group. And like I said, at 7 seconds, I'm going to add a keyframe to opacity. And then I'm going to go to 8 seconds, add another keyframe, and fade this out. So let's play this whole thing back. So right now we've got the logo going across, we've got the sun coming out, we've got the video double masked, we've got the Baywatch logo appearing in the background, and it is fading from one mask image to another, which looks really cool. It's pretty close to the original credits. The only thing that's missing is there's a flare on the sun. The second Baywatch logo appears as that sun sort of does this flare thing. But I didn't think this was necessary. I was really more interested in showing off how you do the double masking. And I think it looks really cool. I think we've achieved quite a professional effect here. And now you can use this kind of effect on any title sequence that you might want to do. But of course, if any of you want to create that final version of this with the sun flare and the little glow effect, please do. I'd love to see it. Post a link to it in the comments below. That is it for today. That's all I wanted to cover. I hope you were able to get something out of it. Thank you, as always, for watching. My name is John Martins. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time on Apple a Day.